Okay, good morning, everyone. I called the Economic Development Authority of City of Portsmouth meeting to order. Indeed, it's always a pleasure to see all the friendly smiling faces and to greet you again on our monthly meeting. Glad to see that, it's most of us are here. That Miss Smith is out of town again. And of course, always a pleasure to see our city manager here again. Very faithful.
I try to be.
I wish our liaisons were as such. Oh, I didn't say that. Thanks again for being here. At this time, as our normal procedure, Mr. Donahue will walk us through the agenda.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. The first item is roll call, which I'll read now. Commissioner Barber.
Okay.
Commissioner Drew.
Here.
Vice Chair Mitchell.
Here.
Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Saunders Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Smith, absent, and Chairman Smith.
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum. The next item on the agenda is your minutes from your October 19th meeting. We sent those out as part of the package on Friday. Not sure if there are any questions or comments to those minutes. We are in need of motion to approval.
Second.
Motion second for adoption.
Motion by Mr. Barber and a second by Ms. Saunders Smith. Roll call vote. Mr. Barber.
Aye.
Ms. Drury.
Yes.
Vice Chair Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Saunders Smith.
Yes.
And Chairman Smith.
Here. Yes.
The motion passes. We're now on to our financials from the month of October. And we have with us from the Finance Department, Ms. Patty Phillips. Patty, I'm going to turn it over to you. And you've got a couple of items I think to present this one.
Well, thank you, Brian. I'm going to do a very high-level review, but as always, if you see something that you have questions, don't hesitate to ask me today or email me. I'd be happy to go into more detail because there's a lot here. And even if I went over line by line, it may be, you might think of a question later. So I'm just going to hit that you have $1,794,985 in cash. Some of it restricted for the North Pier site. Some of it is held at the city at this point, and then the rest in town bank at this point. Your property held for resale is a little over 18 million. And if you scroll down just a little bit more, we're still carrying your revenue note, so hopefully that will be dealt with in the foreseeable future. And your unrestricted net position is 12.5 million. Primarily, it is your property and your cash. I did want to highlight just a little bit on the next statement that there is gain on sale of assets of $96,000. And I wanted to just remind you that reflects the sale of 3335, 3345 Victory Boulevard and 3125 Victory Boulevard. And that is a net of cost and selling expenses. So scrolling on down, we've got our interest expense, on year to date on the two notes that you hold. And we come back to net position at 13.59 million. And I've got a schedule in here on budget to actual as well, if you wanted to spend some time looking at that, but I was not going to go over that unless you would like me to. And you want me to introduce the auditors, or is that later?
Unless there are any other questions with respect to the October financials. Not hearing any. The next item on the agenda is the FY21 financial audit report. presentation and
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Ms. Aris Coleman, who's a director at Clifton Larson Allen. And I think virtually hopefully we'll be joined by Greg Busnick, who is a principal with that firm, which is the equivalent of a partner, you know, back in the days when I was in public accounting. So there's Greg, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Aris.
Greg, can you hear me?
Yep, I hear you just fine.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing us to take a little bit of your time this morning. As Patty mentioned, my name is Aris Coleman. I'm an engagement director with, we say CLA, but it's Clifton Larson Allen, which is the long version. And on the screen here, I have Greg Busnick, who's a principal and responsible for the engagement. Greg has a standing commitment this time, or around this time, that he was unable to attend the meeting in person. Greg, you want to kind of formally introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah. Hey, good morning. My name is Greg Busnick. I'm a principal at CLA. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but I appreciate the opportunity to participate virtually.
And he'll chime in as we go through the presentation. So it was mentioned that this is the 6/30/2021 financial statements for the Economic Development Authority. And just want to highlight a couple of things as the auditor.
You have
you
copies
guys-
of this at your seat.
You guys have a copy of the financial statements in front of you, and it has the word draft on it. And draft means that we're presenting here with the numbers are not going to change. We're just going through our QC process. So what you do not have is the auditor's opinion, which will be coming out shortly. With these financial statements, there's 17 pages here. These financials are management. We have 2 letters that will go into this statement, and that's our opinion. And we give an opinion over the reasonableness of the financials. And the reason why I point that out is that also just to give thanks to, at the city, we work with Patty and Flora, and then EDA, we work with their staff. And really, this is their work, and this is their accomplishment. We just look at it and say, do some numbers, do some reasonableness, and we would present to you. So really, it's really the hard work of the team that I just mentioned. So talking with the financial statements, the opinion that the auditor will issue will be unmodified. Unmodified means that's the highest level of assurance that we are able to issue on a set of financials, which means that we did not identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies or any concerns, any internal controls or compliance that would render the opinion anything different than the highest level of assurance. When the opinion is issued, there'll also be 2 other letters. One is going to be internal control over financial reporting. And with that is part of the government auditing standards. What we're saying is that as part of our audit, we look at internal controls over financial reporting, and we did not identify any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses that require us to report to you today. So that again would be a letter that is the standard letter with no modification. We also be doing a formal communication with governance, which I'll go through in a minute. And this is standards that we are required to communicate with you guys as part of issuing the audit. All right. So there are no questions. We'll go through just the communications with governance. So we issue the financial statements, as I mentioned there, behind the financials, the notes, and the notes have a significant accounting principles. There were no new accounting pronouncements that were applicable to the Development Authority for this year. There's some coming down the pipe, and as they come up, the Development Authority, along with Patty's assistance, will look at their effect on the financial statements for the authority. When we look at estimates, there are some numbers in the financial statements that are not, they're not hard. There's some assumptions around it, and that's determined what the actual value is presented in the financial statements. And when we talk about estimates, we look at allowance for any your accounts receivable. One in relation to is the tenant rent related to the hotel. We look at that, we look at the reasonableness that management would assume that the outstanding accounts receivable will be collectible. Management feels that it will be collected, so therefore there's no allowance against that particular accounts receivable. And then you have the land held for sale. Generally, land is recorded at the fair value when the exchange happens, but because it's held for sale, it's almost like inventory, and at some point in time, it may have to be reevaluated. It's also subject to other conditions that a normal property in your fixed asset would not be subject to. So we look at that as it's kind of a soft estimate, and that the value of it may be subject to change. We didn't have any difficulties during the audit. There were no disagreements with management. We did not have to suggest any corrections to management that they made or did not make. The representation letter, management will sign representation letter to all the information in the financial statements. And what their representation, what they're representing is that all the information, to the best of their knowledge, is true and accurate. Since the financial date, which is 6/30/21, and we're now in November, there's nothing that's happened subsequent to that point that would affect the numbers as of 6/30/21. Management staff first year as the auditors for the authority. And one of the questions we ask is, were there any consultations with other auditors before contracting with us? What would you look for, or in an industry, is that, was there any kind of, call it opinion shopping? Well, I have this issue, what would you say, what would you give me for this issue? And what would my opinion be clean if we do this? So there was no communication with auditors or any discussion, anything significant. And as part of our standards, we're not allowed to make any significant discussions with management prior to us being contracted as the auditors. So, Greg, I think that's it. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just chime in with a couple things. First, I just want to thank management again for their help throughout the whole process. First year engagement for us, so it takes us a little while to get up the learning curve, but they were very helpful, and we appreciate their assistance in getting us up to speed quickly. We did issue, as Eric mentioned, an unmodified opinion. It's also known as a clean opinion, so it's the highest form of assurance that we can give. One thing just to point out in the financial statements, that there is a section called Management's Discussion and Analysis, and that is required supplementary information. And that's a high-level summary of the results of operations, and then gives a little discussion about maybe some future happenings within the authority as well. So just, that's good to look at. That's a 2 or 3 page summary that kind of makes it summarizes information there that a user can look at quickly to kind of get a flavor for what's going on within the organization. Other than that, we didn't have any findings to report, as Eric mentioned, so no management letter comments or internal control related issues. But it's just important to point out that governance, it is important that the board, you do set the tone from the top for the organization. So your communications with policies and procedures within the organization are just important to keep an eye on. And just, one thing just to keep in mind is just industry best practices over IT security. I know that maybe is more of a city responsibility with the systems in use, but we just like to let governors know that it is important that you keep an eye on best practices, policies, and procedures, and the tone from the top of the organization. So that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
I do have one. On page 14, number 6, it says that the hotel, the Renaissance, is operated by Remington. Remington was the previous one.
Which page you said?
14, number 6, where it says property. Says currently owned by Ashford and operated by Remington. Or is that?
That's correct. That's probably language copied from a prior.
Okay.
So what is the correct, that's not correct?
It should mean hotels. I could get you the technical.
Okay, give me that, and we'll get that to Eric.
Oh, yeah.
And I did want to point out that the large accounts receivable from the hotel, as large payment has been received
Okay.
in the October statements. So I should have pointed that out. And Iris referred to the financial highlights, page 3 and 4, and 5 and 6, sort of a recap of what happened during the year that you might find interesting when you have a moment.
Are there any other questions about the board members? One question, well, not a question per se, but just for general information. Just share with us who's involved technically in this review. Is that totally the city? Is staff involved? Who's involved?
Everybody. Staff at economic development and the financial staff of the city. So
Okay, and so you sit down with these, this company and I'll go through it.
but we draft the statements and provide the backup, and they review it. And if they've got questions, we gather additional information, whether it's housed at economic development or in finance.
Okay, and you know me, I'm direct. I'm not trying to
No,
insinuate or say, I'm just for knowledge, that if, in case anybody needs to know
right.
who sits down and goes through this and who's involved, that's all.
Those are good questions.
Okay. Any other questions or any, were you gonna say something? Kathy?
I was just gonna ask a general question. The CDBG loans, is that state or federal?
Those are federal funds through the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Okay, so then we pay back, when we sell those, get the money back. The money goes back to the city.
To the city's HUD program.
Okay. So if we make if there's a profit, then they get a profit.
They get the proceeds,
Right.
Okay,
whether there's a profit or a loss, they get the proceeds.
okay.
And you'll know, just as along those same lines, on the balance sheet, statement of net position, we are reserving out what we have gone back and determined which were federal funds acquired land, from either Portsmouth redevelopment housing or wherever, and we've reserved it out. So you'll notice in 2021, restricted is 558,000 compared to 4,000 in the prior years, because we went ahead and identified that so that it won't have a negative impact on your financials in the future.
Okay. So we weren't doing that in the past?
No.
And to the numbers, we've just got this, so take some time to look at it, and next meeting, I'm positive that Ms. Phillips will be here. She's a faithful attendee also. She can respond to those questions. And if we need to get them back, then we can make those arrangements too. But so, because this is a lot to
digest.
So, at next meeting, we will maybe allot time on the agenda for any follow-up questions.
And if you do have questions, email me in advance, so if I have to dig out anything, I'll be bringing it with me.
Okay.
Do you need the board to accept the audit, Patty?
I don't know about that.
Yes.
I think
Yeah, that's a question to you.
traditionally we have,
Right.
timing wise, should we do that today or do you have time until?
I think so.
I mean, it's up to, it's really your process. I don't know if you want the final or.
Because the Auditor of Public Accounts requires that we have this complete and submitted by,
What was the change, what was it, 5 months after year end, Greg?
Yes, the target, I think, is we want to be complete by December 15th. That's the due date for the city's report, and the EDA is a component unit of the city.
Okay, but should we be approving a draft, not the final document?
Should wait for the final, especially
Right.
since there was an error pointed out in this one.
Yeah.
Well, when's the December meeting?
Next meeting I want to say is December 21st.
Yeah.
So from a timing standpoint, we have a little room.
Harris, it's my understanding that none of the numbers are going to change. We will change that name of the company that owns the hotel. But we've got to include this in the city's comprehensive annual financial report.
So you said our meeting's gonna be too late.
Yes,
It'll be after the deadline.
and that doesn't mean that, you know, if there's issues, we don't want to know about them, because of course we do. So if you do have anything, if you can get them before then, it would be very helpful.
Can we accept the pending final draft? And will that do?
I think, why don't we try this? Why don't we accept it today? If the board's willing to do that. Any comments to Ms. Phillips within the next week? If there's a comment of such urgency or that calls into question anything, the board can have a special meeting prior to December 15th and address it.
Okay,
That sounds good.
that okay with?
Second.
And that's gonna meet the plan. Are we actually approving this now? Is that what is that what y'all's motion was?
Basically following what the attorney said, to approve it now, subject to any questions regarding it being addressed within the next week, and with the possibility of a special call meeting prior to the 15th of December to address any unresolved issues.
Very good. I just wanted that stated, so
Okay.
for the record.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Drury. I'll read the roll call vote. Commissioner Barber,
Aye.
Commissioner Drury,
Yes.
Vice Chair Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Brown,
Yes.
Commissioner Saunders Smith,
Yes.
and Chairman Smith.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay.
And before we get to I did notice that the payment from the hotel was in the financial, but there was a small amount that was not. Did we anticipate receipt of that?
That's the most recent month.
Okay, most recent month. Okay,
And we will have further discussion later in the meeting
okay.
on this matter.
And again, we'd like to thank Ms. Phillips and also Mr. Coleman and Busting. Thank you for your work, and thank you for being here today. We certainly appreciate on behalf of the authority. Thank you.
And just in closing, Greg, and as Patty mentioned, if you guys have any questions that you want that relate, that we're not management, but if there's something related to the audit process, she knows how to reach us, and we can do a meeting such as you have today. But if there are things just with management, Patty will answer those questions. Anything with the audit process, we can discuss it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye now.
All right, bye.
We're going to change the presentation momentarily, but we are moving on now to the old business portion of the meeting. We do have a number of items to cover. First of which is an update on the Economic Development Incentive Program, the ad hoc committee, which has met recently. I'm going to ask Vice Chairman Mitchell to provide you all an update on their work in progress.
Okay, we had a couple really good meetings. We're going to have about 300,000 plus in our war chest for incentives. Certainly that's not enough for a big fish, but it's certainly enough for us to get started with some of the things that we wish to do. We had some discussion around the key measurements, and they're around capital investments, jobs created, jobs retained, and trying to develop a ratio that basically says if your capital investment is this amount, you might be eligible for a grant. Based on that, how many FTEs you bring in might result in a grant. We also want to try to benchmark our incentives against our peers so that we're at least competitive, at least in 757, what Hampton may be doing, Norfolk and Portsmouth, just to see how we align up against some of their initiatives. I think that one of the things we probably will take a look at is some of the key anchors that are coming in. So if you take a look at the wind turbine industry, are there any spinoff businesses that we might be able to attract to support that? And then long term, I was thinking right now the turbines are assembled here, not manufactured here. But I think we could have some conversation at some point about manufacturing them here. That certainly would increase the speed of delivery. And it's something that looking down the road might be an appropriate conversation. Certainly not now, but it certainly has some incentives. Along those same lines, we went to see Lineage Logistics, which I think is a good example of speed of delivery from the carrier to the freezer. Are there any other types of positions or companies that would use that same type of protocol? I think those are the things that would make sense for us to just take a deeper dive into in terms of potential growth. So overall, I think it was a good meeting. I think developing the ratios is going to be our biggest challenge. But we do pretty good with the money that we have, and I'm sure we will maximize it to the largest extent to make it beneficial to the city and to the citizens of Portsmouth.
Question, was there any discussion of return on the investment? And if so, sort of what was the nature of that?
I don't remember a lot of conversations. It was really just trying to establish the guidelines for how we'll distribute the funds. The return on investment will obviously be, through additional payroll or capital investment. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question correctly.
Yeah. Typically, one of the key features of any incentive policy is a evaluation of return on investment to the entity that is there. In the normal locality, the return on investment is usually from real estate taxes and machinery and tool taxes. To there, in some cases, sales taxes. But normally, the return on investment time period is what is, critical in the evaluation. In other words,
Well, those were in the tool chest. The timeframes, I don't think we have narrowed down.
That will be something that, as we work to develop the program guidelines and parameters that we will be including, whether it be job creation and when does that occur, capital investment, the timeframe for that investment occurring, those will all be factors that we will consider. And absolutely, the intent is to have a return on the investment for any incentive that is provided. We are working to identify, to Vice Chair Mitchell's point, those targeted industry sectors that we feel are priorities here in Portsmouth and that we do want to incentivize. So offshore wind is obviously advanced manufacturing and something we focus on here, in addition to logistics and distribution uses that we would like to include in the program. So we will work to flush that out, come back before you in the near future with some parameters that we would propose and recommend as staff and the ad hoc committee as well. But certainly we'll have something more solid and mapped out for your consideration. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell.
And she's not here, but Miss Barbara Smith was on it with you too.
Yes.
Yeah, well, thank y'all both.
Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda is your FY22 business investment program. If you recall, this is a relaunch of your prior local incentive program, which is really your real estate investment program, which we have retooled and relaunched in the time between the start of the fiscal year and this point in time. And then we created 2 additional programs to assist small businesses, and those are really focused on micro enterprises and startups, really those entrepreneurial types of ventures that are something we're encouraging here in the city. These guidelines were presented to you back in August, and we have provided to you the package that went out last week, the formal applications and finalized guidelines for your acceptance here hopefully this morning. We are looking to roll these out and launch the programs as of January. They would run through the end of the fiscal year, June 30. Certainly we can discuss these in detail if needed. To recap, the real estate investment program, we're looking at combining all of those applications into one. So your facade improvements, interior build out, safety and security improvements can now be completed under one application, where an applicant can receive up to $25,000. For the small business programs, your Smart Start business development grant, we're offering up to $2,000 for new businesses between 0 and 3 years that are just establishing and need assistance getting off the ground. And then we've also proposed the third program, which is the Smart Start Accelerator grant for those businesses between 3 and 7 years, where they can receive up to $5,000 with a applicant match for business expansion. Be happy to answer any questions and open it for discussion, but we would like to ask for your acceptance and approval this morning of all 3 of the programs. And we do need to discuss the budget for programs. Your current operating budget for the year does include $300,000 for the real estate investment program, but we need to establish line items for the Smart Start programs. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Chairman Smith, and open it for discussion.
Yes, Neil.
I just had a couple of nitpicky edits kind of thing. On the application form, it has 2 entries for full-time employees. And should that one of them be part-time employee, one for full-time employee?
I'm sorry, Mr. Barber, which application were you?
All 3, the application form,
Okay,
the first page of it.
and the comment was with respect to the positions?
Yeah, down there it requests number of full-time employees, and right underneath it says number of full-time employees.
Okay.
Other side.
Duplicate line on the end.
I can address these with staff because they're not substantive, they're pretty much editorial kind of things. If you would prefer, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I don't think that was a duplicate. One should be part-time, right?
And one should be part-time and one should be
Just, yeah,
full-time.
these are the corrected.
I mean, these are just,
Part-time.
these are nitpicky kind of.
No, it's not nitpicky. It's not correct.
Yes, we will correct that.
Okay, in the Smart Start and the Accelerator kind of thing, under the statement of need and business activity description, you use the same description as you do for the real property one. You may want to change that.
Okay, we'll take a look at that. I think it, the intention was it for it to apply in the same manner, but I think the wording may need to be revised a little bit.
Because
We'll
it's sort
take
of,
a look at that.
yeah, if you're doing consulting services, you're not taking a picture of anything.
Right.
And for the Smart Start business there, the date of business establishment, you may just want to change the wording slightly there, because in a lot of cases there, it won't have been established. It'd be startup business.
Okay.
Very good.
Yeah, there were two things.
Okay, what else there?
There was a typo, application checklist sheet.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
If there are any other comments in terms of corrections that need to be made to the application, feel free to notify us. And we'll look at the comments Mr. Barber and Mr. Reed shared and get those corrected. But as far as the guidelines programs, I believe these are all consistent with what was proposed back in August. Unless there are any other recommendations or suggestions we would like to have you approve the applications as presented for them to go into place as of January.
I recommend approval with the modification.
Can I ask one question? The real estate,
Let's get second
Okay.
first and then,
A second approval.
now, question.
they can, so someone can get the real estate, improvement grant of $25,000 and get this other grant, correct? Or was it, they can only get one of the three?
They can participate in both programs.
Okay, I just want to clarify that. Okay.
That's correct. The eligible activities and items are different between the two, so they can participate in both programs. We had a motion and a second by Mr. Brown.
Any other further question?
A discussion? Commissioner Barber,
Aye.
Mr. Drury,
Yes.
Vice Chair Mitchell,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Saunders Smith,
Yes.
and Chairman Smith.
Yes.
Motion passes, the applications are approved. And I do believe we need to establish for your budgets line items for each of the Smart Start business development programs. Staff's recommendation, I think based on prior conversation, that the board appropriate $100,000 for each of the two programs. We feel that that would allow for you to assist up to 50 small businesses under the startup grant program and 20 under the other program. That was acceptable.
What was it? How much is it?
So you've already included in your operating budget for the year, you have 300,000
Right.
already programmed as part of the real estate investment program. So that's already been approved.
Right.
But we have the two new programs that are launching, and we do need to establish our budget line items for both of those.
And your recommendation is 50 and 20? Is that what you said?
$100,000 for each of those, so a total of 200,000 dedicated towards the small business starting programs. So 100 and 100.
And that will be, can be accommodated in the present.
We believe so. We have a line item in the budget now. I believe it's $1 million that we've allocated for economic development grants. So it could come from that. We could just reduce that by 200,000, leaving 800,000 still for your economic
Is that
investment.
okay?
So the motion then will be to transfer 200,000. That line item you mentioned.
Transfer 200,000 for your new program from your existing line item of economic development grants. So the motion would be to transfer that money from an existing.
Move for approval.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay. Chair, if it's okay with you, I'll read the roll here. Commissioner Barber,
Aye.
Commissioner Drury.
Aye.
Vice Chair Mitchell.
Aye.
Commissioner Brown,
Yes.
Commissioner Saunders Smith,
Yes.
and Chairman Smith.
Yes.
The motion passes. Very good, thank you. That concludes the FY22 Business Investment Program discussion. The next item is property inventory update. We do have some transactions that have occurred in this fiscal year. As part of your package, you were given the comprehensive property inventory listing for all EDA owned property. That does identify in green the properties that are currently under contract. We have a number of closings that are pending and should be forthcoming within the next 2 quarters. If we can go, Ms. Biedenbach, to the next slide in the presentation. We've had 2 closings that have occurred in this fiscal year. Ms. Phillips had mentioned this during the financial presentation. 3345 Victory Boulevard did close at the start of the fiscal year. That was sold to Riptide 4, which is a commercial retail development there at the corner of Greenwood Drive and Victory Boulevard. The other more recent transaction, 3125 Victory Boulevard, just down the street, closed on October 18th. We sold that to Home Improvements 2 LLC. That is a general contracting firm that will be developing a office and flex warehouse building on that property. So that has recently closed. And then, of course, we do have some closings that will be coming up. Those are identified in the property inventory that was provided to you last week. I'm happy to answer any questions specific to properties if you have any. But certainly we've had some good activity here lately. And I will share with you, we're starting to see additional interest throughout the city, primarily Victory Boulevard. We'll have an item for discussion here later. Okay, hearing none, moving on, we have a few local incentive program items that require action. The first is 3315 High Street. This is a facade improvement grant and interior build-out grant that was provided to Helping Hands for Heroes. We have been before you previously with some requests for extensions and some other financial assistance. They are in the process of completing the work. Recover. Their current grant deadline expires today. So we are before you in need of another extension. We would recommend providing a 90-day extension to allow for them to finish the work, obtain their certificate of occupancy, and then to reimburse them for their work upon documentation of completion. So we are in need of another 90-day extension. We would recommend your authorization of that. Happy to provide additional details on this item if needed. Answer any questions.
You indicated that they are proceeding with the work. Is that correct?
They are. We've done a recent walkthrough inspection. It's probably 90% complete at least. There are a few items that were outstanding that we're waiting on city inspection, but it's very close to being complete.
And everybody's familiar with that property that we're talking about. Okay. And again, we've worked with the city manager and, getting that resolved. And so it's still some little hiccups, but it's come a long ways.
I move the approval of the extension.
Second that. A second.
It's a consensus, you'd like to vote on that. Okay. Okay, motion to approve extension for 90 days. The motion was by Mr. Barber and the second was Mr. Brown.
No other questions.
No discussion. Okay. Commissioner Barber. Mr. Drury.
Yes.
Vice Chair Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Saunders-Smith.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Smith.
Yes.
Motion passes. The extension is granted. The next item under local incentive program is 305 High Street. This is for an interior build-out grant that was provided to the property at 305, the owner operators SMT Enterprises. We have a change in their application. As it was originally proposed, the use that was proposed for the property was to serve as a market and bodega. Those plans changed. Their business plans and model for what they were looking to do changed based on some market activity or lack thereof in the area. They have kind of changed course and built out a restaurant in the space, which is permitted by the zoning. It is operating now. The work that was performed was the same as what was proposed under the application originally in terms of the build out that they were receiving grant funding for. They have received their certificate of occupancy. They're operating now at 305 High Street, and they have come to staff requesting reimbursement. And because of the fact that it was a change in use, we wanted to bring it for you for consideration and approval before we dispersed any funds. Again, the work that was performed is consistent with what was in the application, but the use has changed from what was included in the application. So the work consisted of flooring, HVAC equipment replacement, interior build out, painting, electrical, plumbing, restrooms, kitchen, and so forth. They actually have done more work than what was proposed in the original application, but they would still be utilizing the maximum grant amount of $25,000. Because of the change, we wanted to make sure that the board found that acceptable. It is in compliance with zoning. They do have their necessary zoning compliance in order and have received all of their building sign-offs as well.
Are they open now?
They are open. I believe the restaurant is, I think it's called Truth Restaurant. It's at 305 High Street. It's adjacent to Bangkok Gardens, the old Fleming's Gym.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, were we aware that all that they had changed it? I mean, not the board, but the staff.
Staff was notified in the process.
Okay.
Yes. And they had to go through a zoning process as well. We were informed.
Yeah, I move forward with it. A lot of times markets and bodegas sell food and end up being a restaurant anyway, so you can't really.
And the point was just to make sure that
Right, and they comply with the interior build out.
that y'all move as well as staff. Okay, so we can do a consensus. So everybody good with that one? We can just indicate by. Okay, issue 9.
Yeah, thank you very much. This will help close out the grant program for the year. We've just got a few of those.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, we are in need of a closed session.
Motion. Who that? Anybody else? Motion.
Closed session.
I move to go into a closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711A.8 for the purpose of consulting with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically regarding collection of debts owed to EDA, and B, pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711A.3 for the purpose of discussing the acquisition or disposition of real property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body. specifically regarding 409 McLean Street, 3336 Victory Boulevard, the Portsmouth Entertainment District, and strategic acquisitions.
Need a second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Drury. Roll. Mr. Barber.
Aye.
Mr. Drury.
Yes.
Vice Chair Mitchell.
Yes.
Commissioner Brown.
Yes.
Commissioner Saunders Smith.
Yes.
And Chairman Smith.
Yes.
We are now in closed meeting.
Just
This
comment,
conference will now be recorded.
That was related to the, yeah,
Hold that.
too late.
Yeah, that's what it's after. Yeah. Mr. Mitchell.
I hereby move that each commissioner certify that to the best of his or her knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting just concluded.
We need a second.
second,
Mr. Barber, thank you. Roll call vote. Mr. Barber.
aye.
Mr. Drury.
Yes.
Mr. Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Ms. Saunders Smith.
Yes.
And Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Okay, we are now in open session. And we do have an item on the agenda, and we are in need of a motion. Which is 409 McLean Street.
I can read, yep. Resolution 409 McLean, whereas pursuant to resolution adopted on May 19, 2018, the EDA entered into a purchase and sale agreement with the Miller Group of Virginia, Inc., the developer, for the residential development of 409 McLean Street, the property, as amended the agreement. Whereas the developer is prepared to close on acquisition of the property, commence the development of the property with 197 townhomes, the development. And whereas the purchase price under the agreement is $1,810 per unit for a total of $356,570. Whereas EDA has agreed to provide developer credit in the amount of $200,000 covered portion of the cost of environmental remediation necessary for the development, including disposing of piles of contaminated soil and debris on the property. Now therefore is hereby resolved that one, EDA hereby consents to the amendment of the agreement to provide the purchase price for the property shall be $156,570, calculated as follows: $1,810 multiplied by 197 units minus $200,000. Two, the chair and vice chair are each authorized to execute an amendment to the agreement in accordance with the intent of this resolution. Three, this resolution shall be effective immediately upon its adoption, adopted the 16th day of November 2021.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Barber and Ms. Saunders Smith. And time for a roll call vote. Commissioner Barber.
Aye.
Mr. Drury.
Yes.
Mr. Mitchell.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Saunders Smith.
Yes.
and Chairman Smith.
Yes.
Item is approved. We're now on to items submitted by commissioners. Chairman?
I just had two comments. I just review the, our inventory of properties. It looks like, our inventory is shrinking rapidly, and that's a good thing. Thanks to the staff and to the commission members for their good work in doing that, but it also presents a challenge for us going forward. Just sort of the second comment I had is that we had talked back during our strategic planning session about having a planning director in. Is that still being considered, or is that been postponed, or?
No, it's still been consideration, but we need to make sure he understands what we want and not what he's presented in the past. So yeah, that's still on it.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I had a note here to kind of remind everybody about the meetings with city council and now with PHRA and the planning director meeting. Yes. That it?
One question I had is that, can we get an update? We don't have to do it now, maybe some of the key projects, like where we stand with the data center, the townhouses on High Street. A lot of that's still in planning, but maybe there's 4 or 5 big projects that we can just get an update, even if it's just still in planning. Would be helpful.
Okay, we can surely do that. Absolutely.
Do we know, the CDA know, any status on the Pizza Hut on the corner on London Boulevard? Do we know anything about that?
What I'm able to share with you is that it's under contract with a plan for redevelopment. As soon as I'm able to share more, I will certainly do so, but that's the extent of what I'm able to share.
Anybody else? Any items?
Okay, hearing none. Next item is report backs. I don't believe we've got anything else to touch on that we haven't already covered this morning in terms of report backs. But I did want to share with you all an event that is upcoming, and that is the Hampton Roads Chambers City Managers Forum, which is scheduled for Thursday, December 2nd. That's being held at the Chesapeake Conference Center between noon and 2 p.m. We have purchased a table, and we do have 2 seats available. So Chairman, I would refer to yourself, Vice Chair Mitchell, as far as who will be attending, but we do have 2 seats available. We welcome you to attend and join us for that. That is Thursday, December 2nd, from noon until 2 p.m. And it's the City Managers Forum. Moderator is Steve Romine with Williams Mullen, and the panelists will include the city managers from all. So,
Where's that?
that's at the Chesapeake Conference Center. Happy to provide more details on the event, but hope you're able to join us.
So I need to ask too, if someone else wants to attend, if y'all only have 2 and we can't take any others, is that the case?
We've got 2 seats.
Bottom line.
That's bottom line. So, yes, sir.
If some,
I'll go.
well, I'm getting at that too. I mean, that's what I was first.
I'm sorry.
Don't everybody go.
Want to go?
We want to offer a chance for somebody else to go.
Oh, I'd love to go.
Okay.
I'd love to go.
Okay.
I'll go. Okay.
Too late.
It's really misunderstood. Thank you.
Now y'all got to report back. I'm just kidding. You don't have to report back unless you want.
What's the time of this?
From noon till 2 p.m. and we'll have the Shepherd get a few other details.
We're serving lunch, right?
Yes, they're serving.
Was that a prerequisite?
No, but they're not.
So
No.
it depends. How long have you been there?
Been going there for 25 years.
I mean, lately.
Oh, what? No.
Okay. I've heard that too, so I'm just asking. Little sidebar, okay.
You all can continue after.
Okay.
We don't have any other items for discussion.
Okay, well, once again, I'm most appreciative and honored to serve such a distinguished group. Always fruitful, always entertaining, always a great opportunity for feedback and everybody's input, and that never fails us. So, with that, I will adjourn this meeting.